Maria Rodriguez wiped down another sticky table at Danny's diner, her feet aching after an 8-hour shift that paid barely enough to keep the lights on. She had no idea that in 3 months, a man in an expensive suit would walk through those glass doors asking for her by name, carrying an offer that would transform her family's entire future. She didn't know that her simple act of kindness on a bitter February night had planted a seed that would grow into something extraordinary. All she knew was that her children needed dinner, and the grocery store closed in 20 minutes. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button for more real, emotional, life-changing stories like this, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The bitter wind cut through Maria's thin jacket like a knife as she hurried across the parking lot of Henderson's Grocery, her worn sneakers crunching against the salt-stained asphalt. February in Cleveland had been particularly cruel this year, with temperatures dropping well below freezing for weeks on end. She pulled her coat tighter around her chest, already calculating in her head how she could stretch the $43 in her wallet to feed her 2 children for the next 4 days until her next paycheck arrived. Working double shifts at the diner had become routine since her ex-husband stopped sending child support 6 months ago. The divorce had been finalized 2 years prior, but the financial strain seemed to grow heavier with each passing month. Her daughter Emma, now 12, had started asking fewer questions about why they couldn't afford new clothes, or why their friends seemed to have things they didn't. Her son Jake, 8 years old and still hopeful about the world, continued to dream big despite their circumstances. As Maria approached the automatic doors of the grocery store, movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. Huddled against the brick wall beside the entrance sat a man who appeared to be in his early 40s, though the harsh lines etched into his face made it difficult to determine his exact age. He wore layers of tattered clothing that seemed insufficient against the brutal cold, and his shoes had holes that exposed dirty socks underneath. His dark hair was unkempt, and several days' worth of stubble covered his gaunt cheeks. Most people walked past him without a second glance, their eyes focused straight ahead as they hurried into the warmth of the store. Maria paused, watching as he pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders, his entire body trembling from the cold. She recognized something in his posture, a defeated slump that spoke of someone who had given up hope of things getting better. The rational part of her mind reminded her of her own precarious situation. Every dollar mattered when you were living paycheck to paycheck, and she had already borrowed money from her sister twice this month to cover Jake's school lunch fees. But something deeper stirred within her as she watched the man's labored breathing create small puffs of vapor in the frigid air. Maria approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up when her shadow fell across his lap, his eyes a striking shade of blue that seemed too bright against his weathered face. There was intelligence there, she noticed, and a depth of sadness that made her chest tighten with empathy. "Excuse me," she said softly, crouching down to his level. "Are you okay? You must be freezing out here." The man studied her face for a moment, as if trying to determine whether her concern was genuine. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse from cold and disuse. "I'm managing, thank you. Just trying to stay out of the wind." "When was the last time you had something warm to drink?" Maria asked, noticing how his hands shook as he adjusted his position against the wall. He hesitated before answering. "It's been a while, but please don't worry about me. I'm sure you have your own concerns to deal with." Maria glanced toward the grocery store entrance, where people continued to flow in and out, most of them avoiding eye contact with the homeless man. She thought about her grocery list, carefully planned to maximize nutrition while minimizing cost. She thought about Emma, who had been asking for new school supplies, and Jake, whose winter coat was getting too small for his growing frame. Then she looked back at the man's blue eyes and made a decision that would ripple through both their lives in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. "Wait here," she said, standing up and unwinding the burgundy wool scarf from around her neck. It had been a Christmas gift from her mother 3 years ago, one of the few nice things she owned. She draped it gently around the man's shoulders, ignoring his weak protests. "This should help a little." The man's eyes widened with surprise. "I can't take this. You need it for yourself." "I'll be fine," Maria replied, though she could already feel the cold air biting at her neck. "I'm going inside the store now. Is there anything specific you need? Something hot to drink?" "Ma'am, I can't accept charity. I don't have any way to pay you back." Maria smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in weeks. "Who said anything about paying me back? Sometimes we all need a little help. There's no shame in that." She left him with the scarf and went inside the store, her mind racing as she grabbed a shopping cart and began navigating the familiar aisles. The fluorescent lights felt harsh after the dim parking lot, and the warmth made her realize just how cold she had been outside. Her original shopping list included ingredients for basic meals, chicken that was marked down for quick sale, generic brand pasta, and vegetables that were slightly past their prime but still nutritious. As she moved through the store, however, she found herself adding items she hadn't planned on purchasing. A large thermos of hot coffee from the deli counter, a package of warm dinner rolls from the bakery section, a container of hearty vegetable soup that was ready to eat. At the checkout counter, she watched the total climb higher than she had intended. The cashier, a teenage girl with bright pink nail polish, scanned each item with practiced efficiency. When the final amount appeared on the screen, Maria felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. She was spending almost $60, $17 more than she had budgeted. "That'll be $59.47, the cashier announced, already reaching for the next customer's items. Maria handed over her debit card, silently calculating how she would make up the difference in her budget. Maybe she could work an extra shift at the diner. Maybe her neighbor Mrs. Patterson would need help cleaning her house again. She would figure it out somehow. Outside, the man was still sitting in the same position, but now he was wrapped in her scarf, and some color had returned to his cheeks. He looked up in surprise when she approached with 2 grocery bags and the hot coffee. "I told you not to worry about me," he said, but his voice carried gratitude rather than annoyance. "And I told you that sometimes we all need help," Maria replied, setting one of the bags down beside him. "There's soup in here, some bread, a few other things. The coffee should warm you up." She opened the thermos and poured steaming coffee into the cup that served as a lid. The rich aroma filled the cold air between them, and she watched as he wrapped his trembling hands around the warm cup. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said after taking a careful sip. "You don't even know me." Maria was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. The truth was, she wasn't entirely sure why she felt compelled to help him. Maybe it was because she recognized the look of someone who was barely hanging on. Maybe it was because she knew how it felt to be invisible, to have people look right through you as if you didn't matter. "A few years ago, I was going through a really difficult time," she said finally. "My marriage was ending. I was working 3 jobs just to pay rent, and I felt like I was drowning. One day, I was in line at the bank, and I realized I was 50 cents short for the fee to cash my paycheck. I was so embarrassed, and the people behind me were getting impatient." She paused, remembering the shame she had felt in that moment, standing at the counter with a long line of people waiting behind her. This elderly woman stepped forward and put 2 quarters on the counter. She didn't make a big deal about it. Didn't ask for my life story. She just helped, and then she smiled and walked away. I never saw her again, but I never forgot how that made me feel. Not just the practical help, but the reminder that I mattered to someone, even a stranger. The man listened intently, his blue eyes focused on her face as she spoke. Something in his expression shifted, a softening around the edges that hadn't been there before. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. Maria Rodriguez." "I'm David," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm despite the cold, and she noticed calluses that suggested he was accustomed to manual labor. "And I want you to know that what you're doing right now, it means more than you could possibly understand." There was something in the way he spoke, an articulation and education that seemed at odds with his current circumstances. Maria found herself wondering what series of events had led him to this parking lot on this bitter February night. "We all have stories," she said simply. "We all have times when we need someone to see us as human beings instead of just walking past." David nodded, taking another sip of coffee. "Yes, we do. And right now, yours is a story about someone who chose kindness when she could have chosen indifference. That's rare in this world." Maria felt heat rise to her cheeks, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's just coffee and soup. It's not that big a deal." "It is to me," David replied firmly. "Trust me when I tell you that kindness like this, it has power. Sometimes it has the power to change everything." She stayed with him for a few more minutes, making sure he knew how to use the can opener she had included in the bag and pointing out the napkins and plastic spoons. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily, touching on small topics like the weather and the challenges of Cleveland winters. David asked about her children, and she found herself sharing stories about Emma's talent for mathematics and Jake's obsession with dinosaurs. "They sound like amazing kids," David said. "You doing something right." "Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water," Maria admitted. "But they're good kids. They deserve better than what I can give them right now. They deserve you," David said with conviction. "Never underestimate the value of a parent who loves unconditionally and works hard to provide. That's worth more than money could ever buy." Eventually, the cold became too much for Maria to ignore. Her hands were numb despite being tucked into her coat pockets, and she could feel her nose running from the frigid air. She needed to get home to her children, who were staying with her sister while she worked her evening shift at the diner. "I should probably head home," she said reluctantly. "My kids are waiting for me." "Of course," David said, standing up slowly. He was taller than she had expected, probably around 6 feet, though his hunched posture had made him seem smaller. "Maria, I can't thank you enough for this. I know you didn't have to stop, and I know this probably cost you money you couldn't really afford to spend." She wanted to deny it, but the truth was evident in her silence. David nodded, as if he understood. "Someday, I hope I'll be in a position to return your kindness," he said. "If that day ever comes, I won't forget this moment or what you've done for me." "Just take care of yourself," Maria replied. "That's all the thanks I need." She walked back to her car, an aging Honda Civic with a dent in a passenger door and a cracked windshield she couldn't afford to replace. As she loaded her remaining groceries into the trunk, she glanced back toward the store entrance. David was sitting down again, but now he was eating the soup directly from the container, and she could see steam rising from the warm food. The drive home took 15 minutes through neighborhoods that had seen better days. Row houses with peeling paint and chain-link fences lined the streets, interrupted occasionally by corner stores with neon signs advertising cigarettes and lottery tickets. Maria had grown up in this area, and while it wasn't glamorous, it was home. The people here looked out for each other, shared what they had when times got tough, and didn't judge too harshly when someone fell on hard times. Her apartment was on the second floor of a converted Victorian house, accessible through a separate entrance at the back of the building. The stairs creaked under her weight as she climbed them, grocery bags in hand. She could hear music playing from the apartment below, where Mr. Kowalski, a retired steelworker, spent his evenings listening to old Polish folk songs and tinkering with broken electronics. Inside her apartment, the silence felt profound after the constant noise of the diner. The living room was small but clean, furnished with a couch she had bought secondhand. and a coffee table that Jake had helped her assemble from a kit. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, and backpacks were neatly arranged by the door for the next school day. Maria put away the groceries, noting how much smaller the bags seemed now that she had given away a significant portion of their contents. She would need to be creative with meals for the next few days, but they would manage. They always did. She called her sister to let her know she was home and ready to pick up the children. Reza lived only a few blocks away, and she'd been a lifesaver since the divorce, providing childcare when Maria's work schedule demanded it. The conversation was brief but warm, filled with the easy familiarity of siblings who had supported each other through difficult times. 20 minutes later, Emma and Jake burst through the apartment door with the boundless energy that children seem to possess regardless of the hour. Emma, tall for her 12 years with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, immediately began telling her mother about the science project she was working on for school. Jake, smaller and more animated, launched into a detailed description of a documentary about velociraptors that he had watched at his aunt's house. "Mom, did you know that velociraptors were actually only about the size of turkeys?" Jake announced, spreading his arms to demonstrate. But they were super smart and hunted in packs, which made them really dangerous. "That's fascinating, baby," Maria said, helping him out of his winter coat. "Did you brush your teeth at Aunt Rosa's?" "Yes, and we ate spaghetti for dinner, and Emma helped me with my math homework, and Aunt Rosa said we could watch a movie tomorrow if we're good at school." Emma rolled her eyes at her brother's enthusiasm but smiled fondly. "He was actually really good with the math. He's getting better at addition." Maria felt a familiar surge of pride watching her children interact. Despite the challenges they faced as a family, Emma had developed a strong sense of responsibility and often helped take care of her younger brother. Jake, meanwhile, remained optimistic and curious about the world, qualities that Maria hoped would serve him well as he grew older. "How was work, Mom?" Emma asked as they settled into the living room. It was a question she asked every evening, and Maria knew her daughter was old enough to understand that her mother's job wasn't easy. "It was fine, sweetheart. Busy night at the diner, but that's good for tips." She didn't mention the encounter with David or the money she had spent on groceries that weren't for her family. Some acts of kindness were private, and she didn't want her children to worry about their already tight budget. The evening routine proceeded as usual. Baths for both children, with Jake requiring extra supervision to ensure he actually used soap instead of just playing with his toy dinosaurs in the water. Story time, with Emma reading to Jake from one of his favorite books about prehistoric creatures. And finally, tucking them both into their beds, Emma in the smaller bedroom and Jake on a fold-out bed in the living room that they converted each night. "Mom," Jake said as she pulled his blankets up to his chin, "why do some people not have houses?" The question caught Maria off guard. "What makes you ask that, honey?" "I saw a man today when we were walking to Aunt Rosa's car. He was sitting by the bus stop, and he looked really cold. Emma said he probably didn't have a home." Maria glanced toward Emma's room, where she could see her daughter's silhouette in the doorway, listening to the conversation. "Sometimes adults go through difficult times," Maria said carefully. "Maybe they lose their job, or they get sick, or something sad happens in their family. When that occurs, they might not have enough money to pay for a house or apartment." "But what do they do when it's cold outside?" "There are places called shelters where people can go to stay warm and get food," Maria explained. "And sometimes kind people try to help however they can." Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "If we saw someone who was cold, would we help them?" Maria thought about David, probably still sitting outside the grocery store despite the dropping temperature. "Yes, baby. If we could help someone and it was safe to do so, we would absolutely try to help them." "Good," Jake said, with the simple moral certainty of childhood. "That's what we should do." After both children were asleep, Maria sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop, reviewing her budget and trying to figure out how to accommodate the extra grocery spending. She worked through various scenarios, calculating the impact of picking up additional shifts at the diner versus finding side work cleaning houses or babysitting. The numbers were tight, but manageable. She could work an extra shift on Sunday, when the diner was busy with the after-church crowd and tips were generally good. Mrs. Chen, who lived 3 blocks away, had mentioned needing help organizing her basement, and she always paid fairly for household projects. As she closed the laptop and prepared for bed, Maria found herself thinking about David and wondering where he would spend the night. The temperature was supposed to drop even further, and she hoped he had found somewhere warm to sleep. She thought about his blue eyes and the intelligence she had seen there, the way he spoke with education and thoughtfulness despite his circumstances. There had been something about their conversation that stayed with her, a sense that there was much more to his story than what appeared on the surface. But then again, everyone had hidden depths, struggles and triumphs that weren't immediately visible to strangers. The next morning arrived with the shrill sound of her alarm clock at 5:30. Maria had picked up an early shift at the diner, which meant leaving the house before the children woke up. Rosa would come over to get them ready for school, a routine they had established months ago that worked well for everyone involved. The diner was already bustling when she arrived, filled with construction workers grabbing coffee and breakfast before heading to job sites, and office workers who preferred Danny's greasy but satisfying food to the corporate core. Coffee chains downtown. Maria tied her apron around her waist and began the familiar rhythm of taking orders, pouring coffee, and delivering plates of eggs and bacon to hungry customers. "You're quiet this morning," observed Danny himself, a stout man in his 60s who had owned the diner for 30 years. He was wiping down the grill while keeping an eye on the dining room. "Everything okay at home?" "Everything's fine," Maria assured him. "Just tired. Emma had a nightmare last night, so I didn't get much sleep." It wasn't entirely true, but Danny didn't need to know about her encounter with David or the way it had kept her awake thinking about the thin line between stability and desperation. Danny was a good boss who paid fair wages and didn't ask too many personal questions, but Maria had learned to keep her private struggles private. The morning shift passed quickly, a blur of coffee refills and breakfast orders. Around 10 o'clock, when the breakfast rush was winding down, Maria found herself thinking about David again. She wondered if he was still at the grocery store or if he had moved on to find shelter elsewhere. During her break, she walked 2 blocks to Henderson's grocery, telling herself she needed to pick up milk for the children's cereal. The truth was, she wanted to see if David was still there and check on his condition after the brutal night. The spot where he had been sitting was empty. Maria felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief, because it meant he had found somewhere warmer to spend the night. Disappointment because she had hoped to see him again, to confirm that he was okay and perhaps bring him another hot drink. She bought the milk and walked back to the diner, pushing thoughts of David to the back of her mind. She had her own life to focus on, her own challenges to meet. One act of kindness didn't create an ongoing obligation, even though part of her wished she could do more to help. February turned into March, and March gave way to April. The brutal winter finally loosened its grip on Cleveland, replaced by the tentative warmth of spring. Maria continued her routine of working double shifts at the diner, picking up extra work where she could find it, and maintaining the delicate balance of single parenthood. Emma's science project earned her 2nd place in the school competition, a success that filled Maria with pride even as she worried about the cost of the celebration dinner her daughter wanted to have with friends. Jake lost his first tooth and left it under his pillow for the tooth fairy, requiring Maria to remember to slip a dollar bill under his pillow after he fell asleep. Life moved forward with its familiar challenges and small victories. The encounter with David faded into memory, filed away with other moments of human connection that had brightened difficult days. Maria didn't forget him entirely, but she also didn't expect to see him again. Spring brought new customers to the diner, tourists visiting Cleveland for baseball games and families emerging from winter hibernation to rediscover their city. The increased business meant better tips, which allowed Maria to breathe a little easier financially. She was even able to buy Emma a new pair of shoes without having to choose between footwear and groceries. It was a Tuesday in mid-May when everything changed. Maria was working the lunch shift, moving between tables with practiced efficiency, when she noticed a man in an expensive-looking suit standing near the entrance. He was scanning the dining room as if looking for someone specific, and something about his posture caught her attention. When their eyes met across the crowded restaurant, Maria felt a jolt of recognition that seemed impossible. The man was well-dressed, clean-shaven, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to success. But his eyes were the same striking blue she remembered from that February night outside the grocery store. "David?" she whispered, though she was too far away for him to hear. He smiled and began walking toward her, navigating between tables filled with lunch customers. As he got closer, Maria could see the transformation more clearly. His hair was professionally cut, his skin had a healthy color, and the suit he wore probably cost more than she made in a month. But it was definitely the same man she had given her scarf to on that bitter winter night. "Hello, Maria," he said when he reached her table. His voice was the same, but stronger now, filled with warmth and something that might have been excitement. "I can't believe it's you," Maria said, setting down the coffee pot she had been carrying. "You look—" She struggled to find the right words. "You look completely different." "I feel completely different," David replied. "Do you have a few minutes to talk? I know you're working, but this is important." Maria glanced around the diner, noting that most of her tables had been served and were settled into their meals. Danny was behind the counter, but he gave her a nod when she caught his eye, indicating that she could take a short break. "I can spare a few minutes," she said. "Would you like to sit down?" David nodded toward an empty booth in the corner, away from the busiest part of the dining room. They settled across from each other, and Maria found herself studying his transformation with amazement. This was not the desperate, broken man she had encountered in the grocery store parking lot. "I owe you an explanation," David began. "And I owe you a debt that I'm finally in a position to repay." "You don't owe me anything," Maria said automatically. "I told you that night I didn't help you expecting anything in return." "I know you didn't. That's exactly why what you did was so powerful." David leaned forward, his blue eyes intense with sincerity. "Maria, that night when you stopped to help me, I was at the absolute lowest point of my life. I had lost everything: my business, my house, my marriage, my self-respect. I had been living on the streets for 2 months, and I had convinced myself that I was invisible, that nobody cared whether I lived or died." Maria listened in silence, beginning to understand the depth of desperation she had witnessed that night. "I had made a decision," David continued, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "I had decided that I couldn't go on anymore. The cold, the hunger, the constant rejection and humiliation. I was planning to end my life that night after the store closed." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She had known David was suffering, but she hadn't realized the extent of his despair. "But then you stopped," David said, his voice growing stronger. "You saw me as a human being. You gave me your scarf, bought me food, and most importantly, you talked to me like I mattered. You reminded me that kindness still existed in the world, and that maybe, just maybe, I was worth saving." Maria felt tears forming in her eyes. "David, I had no idea. I just saw someone who was cold and hungry." "Exactly. You saw someone who needed help, And you helped without asking for my story or judging my circumstances. That night, after you left, I sat in that parking lot thinking about what you had said, about how we all have stories, and how we all need people to see us as human beings. David reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a burgundy wool scarf. Maria's scarf, the one she had given him that night. It had been cleaned and looked almost new. I've been carrying this with me every day since that night, he said, placing it gently on the table between them. It reminded me of your kindness whenever I was tempted to give up. You kept it all this time? I kept it because it saved my life, David said simply. The next morning, I walked to the library when it opened and spent the day researching resources for people in my situation. I found a shelter that had a program to help people get back on their feet. I applied for Khan assistance, started working with a counselor, and began putting together a plan to rebuild my life. Maria picked up the scarf, running her fingers over the soft wool. It seemed impossible that such a simple gesture could have had such profound consequences. It wasn't easy, David continued. I had to confront a lot of mistakes I had made, deal with depression and anxiety, and learn how to believe in myself again. But every time I wanted to quit, I remembered that conversation we had about kindness having power. I remembered that someone had seen me as worth helping, even when I couldn't see it myself. What happened to your business? Maria asked. You mentioned that you had lost everything. David's expression grew more serious. I had built a consulting company that specialized in helping businesses improve their customer relationships. It was successful for several years, but I made some poor financial decisions and trusted the wrong people. When the economy shifted, everything collapsed very quickly. I lost clients, couldn't pay my employees, and ended up personally liable for debts I couldn't cover. He paused, looking out the window of the diner at the busy street beyond. My wife couldn't handle the stress and uncertainty. She left, took our daughter with her, and filed for divorce. I was so ashamed of failing that I isolated myself from friends and family. Pride, I suppose. I kept thinking I could fix everything on my own, but instead I just made everything worse. That must have been incredibly difficult, Maria said softly. It was. But losing everything also taught me what really mattered. During those months on the street, I had a lot of time to think about what kind of person I wanted to be and what kind of life I wanted to rebuild. David straightened in his seat, and Maria could see excitement building in his expression. 6 months ago, I launched a new company. It's completely different from my previous business, but it's built on everything I learned during the darkest period of my life. What kind of company? It's called Resilience Wellness. We create products and content focused on mental health, personal recovery, and human connection. But more than that, we're building a community of people who understand that everyone deserves compassion and support, regardless of their circumstances. Maria was impressed but also confused about why David was sharing this with her. She was happy for his success, but she couldn't see how it related to her own life. The company has grown faster than I ever imagined, David continued. We have products in stores across the country, an online platform and hundreds of thousands of users, and we're developing partnerships with mental health organizations and social service agencies. That's amazing, David. I'm so happy that you were able to rebuild your life. I couldn't have done it without remembering the lesson you taught me that night. That's why I'm here, Maria. I want to offer you a job. The words hung in the air between them, and Maria felt as if she had misheard him. I'm sorry? What? I want to offer you a full-time position with Resilience Wellness. You would be our Director of Community Stories, responsible for collecting and sharing stories of resilience, kindness, and human connection. It's remote work, so you could do it from home, and the salary would be significantly more than what you're making here at the diner. Maria stared at him, trying to process what she was hearing. David, I don't have any experience in that kind of work. I'm a single mother who works at a diner. I don't have a college degree or business training. You have something much more valuable than formal education, David replied firmly. You have authentic compassion and the ability to see people for who they really are. The stories that resonate most with our community are the ones that come from real human experience, not corporate marketing strategies. He pulled out his phone and showed her the screen, which displayed a professional-looking website with testimonials and success stories. Everything we do at Resilience Wellness is based on the principle that small acts of kindness can have enormous impact. Your story, what you did for me that night, it's exactly the kind of human connection that our community needs to hear about. Maria looked at the website, scrolling through stories of people who had overcome challenges, found hope in dark times, and discovered the power of community support. It was inspiring, but it also felt impossibly distant from her own life. I don't understand why you would offer this to me, she said honestly. You could hire someone with experience, someone with credentials. I could, David agreed, but they wouldn't bring what you bring. Maria, you saved my life without even knowing it. You did it because it was the right thing to do, not because you expected anything in return. That authenticity, that genuine care for other people, it's exactly what we need. Maria felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what David was proposing. A full-time job that would allow her to work from home, spend more time with her children, and earn enough money to provide them with opportunities she had only dreamed about. What would I actually do in this job? She asked, trying to ground the conversation in practical details. You would interview people who have stories of resilience and recovery. You would write articles for our website and social media platforms. You would help develop content for our wellness programs and resources. And you would be the authentic voice of our brand, helping people understand that everyone's story matters. David pulled out a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. I've put together a formal job offer with all the details, salary, benefits, job description, everything. I want you to take this home and think about it seriously. Maria opened the folder and looked at the first page. The salary figure made her catch her breath. It was more than double what she currently earned working 2 jobs, and the benefits package included health insurance, dental coverage, and even a retirement savings plan. This seems too good to be true, she said quietly. I understand why you might feel that way, David replied. But I want you to know that this isn't charity. This is a business decision based on your qualifications and what you can contribute to our company. I'm not offering you this job because I feel sorry for you or because I want to repay a debt. I'm offering it because I believe you're the right person for the position. Maria looked around the diner, taking in the familiar sights and sounds of her current life. The coffee-stained tables, the smell of grease from the kitchen, the constant noise of conversation and clinking dishes. It had been her reality for so long that imagining something different felt almost impossible. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. My contact information is in the folder, along with references from our current employees and examples of the kind of work you would be doing. David stood up from the booth, straightening his suit jacket. Maria, I want you to know that regardless of whether you accept this offer, what you did for me that night changed everything. You gave me hope when I had none. And you reminded me that people are fundamentally good. That lesson has shaped everything I've built since then. I'm still having trouble believing that something so small could have such a big impact, Maria admitted. That's the beautiful thing about kindness, David said with a smile. We rarely know how far our actions will reach or whose life we might touch, but every act of compassion creates ripples that spread outward in ways we can't imagine. He reached out and shook her hand, his grip firm and warm. Think about the offer, Maria, but also think about what this could mean for Emma and Jake. Think about the stability and opportunities it could provide for your family. After David left, Maria sat in the booth for several more minutes, staring at the folder in front of her. The lunch rush was starting to pick up, and she knew she needed to get back to work, but her mind was reeling from the conversation. Danny appeared at her table, his expression curious. "Friend of yours?" "Something like that," Maria replied, closing the folder and standing up. "Someone I helped once, and now he's trying to help me." "Must have been some help you gave him," Danny observed, nodding toward the expensive suit David had been wearing. Maria smiled, thinking about the scarf and soup she had shared on a bitter February night. Sometimes the smallest gestures have the biggest impact. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of automatic motions. Maria served customers, refilled coffee cups, and cleared tables, but her mind was entirely focused on the contents of the folder tucked safely in her locker. Every few minutes she found herself wondering if the entire encounter had been real or if she had somehow imagined David's transformation and incredible offer. When her shift ended at 3 o'clock, Maria drove straight to Emma's school to pick up both children. It was early release day, which meant she could spend the afternoon with them instead of rushing off to a second job. As she waited in the pickup line with other parents, she watched Emma emerge from the building with her backpack slung over one shoulder and her science textbook clutched against her chest. Jake came bounding out of the elementary entrance a few minutes later, his dinosaur lunchbox swinging from his arm and his shoes untied despite Maria's morning instructions. His face lit up when he saw her car, and he waved enthusiastically before carefully looking both ways and crossing to the parent pickup area. "Mom, guess what happened today?" Jake announced as he climbed into the back seat. "Mrs. Henderson said I have the best dinosaur report in the whole second grade, and she wants me to read it to the first graders tomorrow." "That's wonderful, baby," Maria said, adjusting the rearview mirror to see him. "Better. I'm so proud of how hard you worked on that report." Emma settled into the front passenger seat with the quiet dignity she had cultivated since entering middle school. "How was work today, Mom? You seem different. More excited or something?" Maria was continually amazed by her daughter's perceptiveness. Even as a young child, Emma had been able to read her mother's moods and emotions with uncanny accuracy. "Work was interesting today," Maria said carefully. "Someone I hadn't seen in a long time came to the diner, and we had a nice conversation." "Was it someone from when you were married to Dad?" Emma asked. She rarely brought up her father, but when she did, it was usually with the matter-of-fact tone she used for discussing any other aspect of her life. "No, sweetheart. It was someone I met more recently. Someone I helped once, and today he wanted to thank me for that help." Jake leaned forward from the back seat, inserting himself into the conversation with typical 8-year-old curiosity. "Did you save his life like a superhero?" Maria laughed, the first genuinely carefree laugh she'd had in months. "Not quite like a superhero, Jake. More like just being a good neighbor." "But you did help save his life, didn't you?" Emma asked, studying her mother's face with those wise 12-year-old eyes. "Maybe I did," Maria admitted. "Sometimes we don't realize how much our actions matter to other people." Instead of going straight home, Maria made an impulsive decision to stop at Riverside Park. A small green space with playground equipment and picnic tables that had been the site of many family outings when money was too tight for more elaborate entertainment. The afternoon was warm and sunny, perfect for letting the children play while she had time to think. Emma and Jake ran toward the playground equipment with the enthusiasm that fresh air and freedom always inspired. Maria settled onto a bench where she could keep an eye on them while pulling David's folder from her purse. In the bright afternoon sunlight, the job offer seemed even more surreal than it had in the dim atmosphere of the diner. She read through the documents more carefully this time, noting details she had missed during her initial shock. The position was indeed full-time and remote, with flexible hours that would allow her to structure her work around her children's school schedule. The company provided a laptop, internet stipend, and even a budget for professional development courses. The job description outlined responsibilities that seemed both challenging and meaningful. She would be interviewing people who had overcome significant obstacles, writing their stories for the company's various platforms, and helping develop content that could genuinely help others facing similar bad challenges. It was work that would utilize skills she hadn't even realized she possessed. Her ability to listen without judgment, to ask questions that helped people feel comfortable sharing their experiences, and to see the common palm, humanity in everyone she met. "Mom, look how high I can swing," Jake called from across the playground, pumping his legs to gain altitude on the swing set. "Be careful, baby," Maria called back, though she couldn't help but smile at his fearless joy. Emma had gravitated toward the older children's section of the playground, where she was navigating a complex climbing structure with the careful deliberation she applied to everything in her life. Even in play, she was thoughtful and measured, qualities that would serve her well as she grew older. As Maria watched her children play, she found herself imagining what their lives could look like if she accepted David's offer. Emma could take the advanced math classes she had been wanting to enroll in, but that required expensive tutoring. Jake could join the soccer league he had been asking about, the one that required registration fees and equipment purchases that had been beyond their budget. More than the material improvements, though, Maria thought about the gift of time. With a job that allowed her to work from home, she could be present for school pickup, help with homework, attend parent-teacher conferences without having to request time off from multiple jobs. She could be the kind of mother she had always wanted to be, but that financial necessity had made difficult. The doubts crept in as well, though. What if she wasn't qualified for the position despite David's assurances? What if she failed and left her family in a worse position than before? Working at the diner wasn't glamorous, but it was steady and predictable. She knew exactly what to expect from each shift, how much money she would earn, and what her schedule would look like from week to week. "Emma, Jake, come sit with me for a minute," Maria called. "I want to talk to you both about something." The children approached with the cautious expressions they wore when they sensed their mother had something serious to discuss. Emma sat beside her on the bench, while Jake climbed onto the table portion of the picnic table so he could face them both. "Do you remember when we talked about how sometimes people need help, and if we can safely help them, we should?" Maria began. Both children nodded, though Jake looked slightly worried that he might be in trouble for something. "A few months ago, I helped someone who was having a very difficult time. Today, that person came to see me at work because he wanted to thank me and because he has an opportunity that he thinks might be good for our family." "What kind of opportunity?" Emma asked with the directness that Maria both admired and sometimes found challenging. "A job opportunity. A different job that would let me work from home and spend more time with both of you." Jake's face lit up immediately. "You mean you wouldn't have to work at the restaurant anymore? And you could be home when we get back from school?" "Potentially, yes. But it would also mean some big changes for our family. New responsibilities for me, and probably some adjustments for all of us as we figure out this new situation." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing the information with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "Is it a good job? Would it pay enough for us to be okay?" Maria was struck again by how much her 12-year-old daughter understood about their financial situation. Emma had never complained about their circumstances, but she was certainly aware of them. "It would pay significantly more than what I make now," Maria said honestly. "Enough that we could have some of the things we've had to say no to in the past." "Like soccer?" Jake asked hopefully. "Like soccer," Maria confirmed. "And maybe some other things too. But you're worried about something," Emma observed. "I can tell by your voice." Maria sighed, recognizing that her perceptive daughter deserved an honest answer. "I'm worried because this job would be very different from anything I've done before, I'm worried about whether I'm qualified for it and whether I would be good at it. What would you have to do?" Emma asked. "I would talk to people about their life stories, especially people who have overcome difficult challenges. Then I would write about their experiences to help other people who might be going through similar things." Emma considered this information carefully. "But Mom, you're really good at talking to people. Remember when Mrs. Patterson was so sad after her husband died, and you spent all those afternoons just sitting with her and listening? And you always know exactly what to say when Jake and I are upset about something. That's different, though. That's just being a good friend and a good mother. This would be a professional job with important responsibilities. But isn't being a good friend and mother harder than most jobs?" Emma asked, with the simple logic that children sometimes possessed. "I mean, Mrs. Patterson trusted you with her feelings because you're good at understanding people. And Jake and I tell you things we don't tell anyone else because you make us feel safe and heard." Maria felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to her daughter's words. Sometimes children could see truths that adults made too complicated with their fears and self-doubt. "What do you think I should do?" she asked both children. "I think you should try it," Jake said immediately. "If it doesn't work out, you can always get another job at a restaurant." Emma was more cautious in her response. "I think you should do whatever makes you feel proud of yourself. You work so hard for us, Mom, and you deserve to have a job that makes you happy, not just one that pays the bills." That evening, after dinner and homework and bedtime stories, Maria sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and began researching Resilience Wellness more thoroughly. The company's website was professional and inspiring, featuring testimonials from people who had used their products and resources to overcome depression, addiction, trauma, and other significant challenges. She found articles about David himself, describing his recovery from homelessness and his mission to create a business that prioritized human connection and authentic support over profit margins. There were interviews where he discussed the importance of destigmatizing mental health struggles and creating communities where people felt safe to share their stories. One article included a quote that made Maria's breath catch. "The most powerful moment in my recovery came when a stranger treated me with kindness at my lowest point. She didn't know my story or judge my circumstances. She simply saw another human being who needed help, and she helped. That interaction reminded me that compassion still exists in the world, and it gave me the strength to believe that I was worth saving." He was talking about her, about that February night outside the grocery store. Maria stared at the screen, trying to reconcile the desperate man she had met with the successful entrepreneur who was now offering her a life-changing opportunity. She spent the next hour reading employee testimonials and reviews of the company. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with people describing a work environment that prioritized work-life balance, meaningful projects, and genuine support for employee well-being. Several reviews specifically mentioned David's leadership style, describing him as someone who truly cared about his team members as individuals rather than just workers. By the time Maria closed the laptop, her decision was becoming clear. The opportunity was real. The company appeared to be legitimate and well-run, and the position seemed designed specifically for her skills and personality. More importantly, accepting the job would allow her to provide her children with stability and opportunities while doing work that felt meaningful and purposeful. The next morning, Maria called in sick to the diner for the first time in over a year. She needed a day to make her decision final and to begin the process of transitioning her life if she chose to accept David's offer. After dropping the pal, children at school, she drove to the library and spent several hours researching salary negotiation, remote work best practices, and the wellness industry in general. She also spent time crafting questions she wanted to ask David before making her final decision. Questions about job security, performance expectations, opportunities for advancement, and how the company measured success in her role. Despite her excitement about the opportunity, she wanted to approach it with the same careful consideration she would give any major life decision. Around lunchtime, Maria worked up the courage to call the phone number David had provided. He answered on the second ring, and she could hear the genuine pleasure in his voice when she identified herself. "Maria, I'm so glad you called. Have you had a chance to review the offer?" "I have, and I'm very interested," she said, proud of how professional she sounded despite her nerves. "But I do have some questions I'd like to discuss before making my final decision." "Of course." "Would you prefer to talk over the phone, or would you like to meet in person again?" "Actually, if it's not too much trouble, I'd prefer to meet in person. This is such a big decision for my family, and I want to make sure I understand everything completely." "Absolutely. Are you available this afternoon?" "I could meet you wherever is most convenient for you." They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the children's school, which would allow Maria to be finished with their conversation in time for pickup. As she drove to the meeting, Maria felt a nervous excitement that reminded her of job interviews from years past, before her life had been narrowed to the immediate concerns of survival and child-rearing. David was already seated at a corner table when she arrived, and he stood to greet her with a warm smile. He had traded his expensive suit for khakis and a button-down shirt, looking more approachable while still maintaining an air of professional competence. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice," Maria said as they settled at the table with their coffee. "Thank you for considering the offer so seriously." "I know it represents a significant change from your current situation." Maria pulled out a notebook where she had written her questions, feeling more confident with a concrete plan for their conversation. "I've done some research on the company, and everything I've read has been very positive. But I want to make sure I understand exactly what would be expected of me and how my performance would be evaluated." David nodded approvingly. "Those are excellent questions, and I'm glad you're approaching this thoughtfully." For the next hour, they discussed the practical aspects of the position in detail. David explained that Maria would have monthly goals for content creation, but that quality would always be prioritized over quantity. He described the support system in place for new employees, including a mentor program that would help her develop the technical skills needed for remote work and content management. "What happens if I'm not successful in the role?" Maria asked, voicing her biggest fear. "I would be leaving a steady job to take this position, and I need to know that there's some security for my family." "That's a completely reasonable concern," David replied. "We have a 6-month probationary period for all new employees, during which we provide extensive training and support. If after 6 months either you or the company feels that the position isn't a good fit, we provide 2 months of severance pay to help with the transition to other employment." The arrangement seemed fair and demonstrated that David had thought carefully about the risks from Maria's perspective. They discussed logistics like work schedules, communication with the team, and the tools she would need to be successful in the role. "I have one more question," Maria said as their conversation was winding down. "Why is this position so important to you personally? I can tell that hiring the right person for this role means more to you than just filling a business need." David was quiet for a moment, and Maria could see him choosing his words carefully. "The stories we share through Resilience Wellness, they're not just marketing content for us. They're lifelines for people who are struggling, proof that recovery and growth are possible even in the darkest circumstances. The person who tells those stories needs to understand that responsibility and treat each story with the respect it deserves." He looked directly at Maria, his blue eyes intense with sincerity. "You proved to me that you understand the power of human connection and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. Those aren't skills that can be taught in a training program. They're qualities of character, and they're exactly what we need for this position." As Maria drove to pick up her children that afternoon, she realized that her decision had been made somewhere during their conversation. not just because of the salary or the benefits, though those were certainly important, but because of the way David had described the work and its impact on people's lives. That evening, after homework was completed and the dinner dishes were washed, Maria gathered Emma and Jake in the living room for another family discussion. "I've decided to accept the job offer," she announced, watching their faces for reactions. Jake cheered and jumped up from the couch to hug her. "Does this mean I can play soccer?" "This means we can talk about soccer," Maria said, laughing at his enthusiasm. "And a lot of other things we haven't been able to consider before." Emma smiled, but her expression was more thoughtful. "Are you excited about it, Mom?" "Not just because of the money, but because of the work itself?" "I'm terrified," Maria admitted. "But I'm also more excited about a job than I've been in years. I think I'm going to be good at it, and I think it's going to make a real difference in people's lives." "Then you should definitely do it," Emma said with the confidence that Maria sometimes envied in her daughter. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Maria gave her 2 weeks' notice at the diner. Enduring Danny's gruff disappointment and his grudging admission that she was making a smart decision, she completed paperwork for her new position, set up a home office in the corner of her bedroom, and attended virtual training sessions that introduced her to the company's systems and processes. David had assigned her a mentor named Sarah, a woman in her 40s who had been with Resilience Wellness since its early days. Sarah was patient and encouraging, helping Maria navigate the technical aspects of remote work while also sharing insights about the BAL, company culture and expectations. "The most important thing to remember," Sarah told her during one of their video calls, "is that every story you collect is a gift from someone who trusts you with their experience. Our job is to honor that trust by telling their story in a way that might help someone else who's struggling." Maria's first assignment was to interview a woman named Jennifer who had overcome addiction and rebuilt her relationship with her teenage daughter. The interview was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. After Maria had officially started her new position and the children were settled into their new routine of having her home when they returned from school. As she prepared for that first interview, Maria thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a struggling single mother working multiple jobs just to keep her family afloat. The act of kindness she had shown to a desperate stranger had seemed like a small thing at the time, barely worth remembering. Now, that same stranger had become the catalyst for transforming her entire life, not just through the job offer, but through the reminder that every person has inherent worth and that every act of compassion has the potential to create ripples that extend far beyond what we can imagine. On her first official day of work, Maria sat at the small desk she had set up near her bedroom window, wearing professional clothes for a video call instead of a diner uniform. She had prepared thoroughly for Jennifer's interview, researching addiction recovery and developing questions that would help Jennifer feel comfortable sharing her story. "Remember," she told herself as she opened her laptop and prepared to join the video call, "you're good at talking to people. You're good at listening. You're good at seeing the human being behind the circumstances." The interview went better than Maria had dared to hope. Jennifer was articulate and generous with her story, describing not just the challenges of addiction but also the small moments of hope and connection that had helped her find her way back to sobriety and family relationships. As they talked, Maria found herself genuinely engaged with Jennifer's story, asking follow-up questions that helped illuminate the complexity of recovery and the importance of community support. "You're a natural at this," Jennifer told her at the end of their conversation. "You made me feel heard, not judged. That's a rare gift." After the call ended, Maria sat quietly for a few minutes, reflecting on the conversation and beginning to formulate how she would write Jennifer's story for the company website. She thought about the thousands of people who might read the article, some of whom might be struggling with their own addiction or watching a loved one battle substance abuse. The responsibility felt enormous, but also deeply meaningful. This was work that mattered, work that could genuinely help people feel less alone in their struggles and more hopeful about their possibilities for recovery and growth. That afternoon, when Emma and Jake came home from school, they found their mother still at her desk, typing on her laptop with focused concentration. "How did your first day go, Mom?" Emma asked, dropping her backpack by the door and approaching the makeshift office area. "It went really well," Maria replied, saving her work and turning to face her children. "I interviewed someone with an incredible story, and now I get to write about her experience in a way that might help other people." "What was her story about?" Jake asked, climbing onto the bed to get closer to his mother's workspace. She talked about overcoming some very difficult challenges and learning how to be a good mother again. "It reminded me that everyone deserves a second chance, and that it's never too late to change your life for the better." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Kind of like what happened with you and that man you helped." "He got a second chance. And now he's helping you have a second chance, too." "That's exactly right," Maria said, struck by her daughter's insight. "Sometimes helping other people ends up helping ourselves in ways we never expected." Over the following months, Maria settled into her new role with growing confidence and enthusiasm. Each week brought new interviews with people who had overcome significant obstacles. A veteran dealing with PTSD who had found healing through art therapy. A single father who had built a successful business after losing his job during the pandemic. A woman who had survived domestic violence and become an advocate for other survivors. Each story was unique, but they all shared common themes of resilience, the importance of community support, and the transformative power of being seen and valued as a human being. As Maria wrote these stories and saw them published on the company website, she began to understand the broader impact of the work she was doing. The articles generated hundreds of comments from readers who shared their own experiences, found hope in the stories, or simply expressed gratitude for feeling less alone in their struggles. Maria began to receive emails directly from people who had been helped by the stories she had written, thanking her for giving voice to experiences that were often overlooked or stigmatized. "You have a gift for this work," David told her during one of their monthly check-in calls. "The stories you're producing are among the most read and shared content on our platform. But more importantly, they're having real impact on people's lives." "It doesn't feel like work most of the time," Maria admitted. "Every person I interview teaches me something new about strength and hope. I feel honored that they trust me with their stories." "That's exactly the attitude that makes you perfect for this role," David replied. "Never lose that sense of responsibility and reverence for the stories people share with you." As winter approached again, nearly a year after that life-changing encounter in the grocery store parking lot, Maria found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed. Emma had enrolled in advanced mathematics courses and was thriving academically. Jake had joined the soccer team and discovered a passion for the sport that kept him active and engaged with other children his age. But the changes went beyond material improvements or new opportunities. Maria felt more confident in her abilities, more connected to meaningful work, and more hopeful about her family's future. The chronic stress of financial insecurity had been replaced by the positive challenges of growing in a new career and contributing to something larger than herself. One evening in early December, as Maria was finishing up work for the day, she received an unexpected email from David. The subject line read, "Full circle," and when she opened it, she found a photograph attached. The image showed David standing outside Henderson's grocery, but this time he was wearing a warm winter coat and holding a box of supplies. Next to him stood several other people, all holding similar boxes, and behind them was a van with Resilience Wellness Community Outreach painted on the side. The email explained that the company had launched a new initiative to provide support for people experiencing homelessness, and that they had chosen Henderson's Grocery as their first distribution site in honor of the location where David's own recovery had begun. "I wanted you to see this," David had written, "because none of it would have been possible without that moment of kindness you showed me almost a year ago. Your compassion saved my life. And now we're able to extend that same compassion to others who are facing the darkness I once knew. The ripples keep spreading outward just like we talked about." End quote. Maria stared at the photograph for a long time, thinking about the man she had encountered on that bitter February night and the successful entrepreneur he had become. But more than that, she thought about the dozens of people who would benefit from the outreach program and the countless others who had been helped by the stories she had written and the resources Resilience Wellness provided. It was impossible to trace all the connections, to map every way that single act of kindness had multiplied and spread to touch lives she would never even know about. But she could see enough of the pattern to understand that David had been right about the power of compassion to create change in the world. That night, as she tucked Jake into bed, he asked her a question that had become part of their bedtime routine. "Mom, did you help anyone today?" "I think so, baby. I read a story about someone who overcame some big challenges, and I hope that story will help other people who are going through difficult times." "And someone helped you today too, right? By giving you the job where you can help people?" "That's right. Someone I helped a long time ago found a way to help me back, and now we're both able to help even more people." Jake considered this information with the serious expression he wore when processing complex ideas. "So helping people is kind of like planting seeds that grow into trees that make more seeds?" Maria smiled at his analogy, struck by how clearly he understood the concept that adults often made more complicated than it needed to be. "That's exactly what it's like, Jake. Every time we're kind to someone, we plant a seed. We don't always get to see the tree that grows from it, but that doesn't mean it's not growing." "Then I want to plant lots of seeds," Jake declared with the earnest determination that made Maria's heart swell with pride. "I think you already are, sweetheart. Every time you're kind to your friends at school, every time you help your sister with something, every time you make someone smile, you're planting seeds." As Maria turned off the lights and settled into her own bed that night, she thought about the seeds she had planted and the unexpected harvest they had produced. A simple scarf shared with a stranger had grown into a new career, financial stability for her family, and the opportunity to amplify stories of hope and resilience for thousands of people. But perhaps most importantly, it had reminded her of a truth she had known as a child but had forgotten during the difficult years of divorce and financial struggle: that every person matters, that every act of kindness has value, and that we never know how far our compassion might reach into the world. Outside her window, snow began to fall, covering the city in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and full of possibility. Maria pulled her covers up to her chin and smiled, thinking about the interviews she had scheduled for the following week and the stories still waiting to be told. In a world that often felt divided and harsh, she had found her way to work that reminded people of their common humanity and their capacity for resilience. It was work that honored the best in people while acknowledging the struggles that made them strong. And it had all begun with a burgundy wool scarf and a stranger who needed to know that someone cared whether he lived or died. Maria closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, grateful for the reminder that kindness was never wasted, that every act of compassion planted seeds of hope that could bloom in ways more beautiful than anyone could imagine. The story that had started with a single mother's simple act of generosity had become a testament to the transformative power of human connection, proving that even in the darkest moments, the light of compassion could illuminate paths toward healing, growth, and the kind of second chances that change everything.